tough as nails. We're going through this book of Daniel, and so if anybody knows what it's like to be tough as nails, definitely Daniel would qualify. But before I get jumping into Daniel, there was just a question that I wanted to ask everybody here. And have you ever been on vacation? Anybody here ever been on vacation? You think this is bad spelling with Pastor John, don't you? See, I thought I came up with this new word this week. I thought I need to coin this phrase, fakecation. That's because I had this that's when you tell everybody that you're on vacation, but really what you do is you still do almost everything you normally do and work and work and work. Anybody ever been on vacation? I actually looked it up to see if anybody, it's like a staycation. No, a staycation you actually get to relax. It's different.
I've never been on a staycation then.
Fakecation, yeah, staycation would mean you stay home, you relax, and you don't have to deal with a lot of work stuff, or you feel like you're still working and you're up at 3:30 a.m. still working. I went on vacation for a couple days this week. And I still wasn't able to get everything on my to-do list done. But as I was thinking about this vacation, see, what I wanted to talk about this week was one of my favorite things to do on an actual vacation. By the way, when I looked up vacation, like their definition is different than mine. They said, this is what they said. They used the word vacation in this sentence. And they said, these 3 days in Vegas is a vacation compared to my 10 days in Hawaii or something like that. And I would never consider 3 days that was actually gone somewhere. I guess I've never really been on a vacation. Because they would call my stuff vacations, even the good stuff. But one of my favorite things to do on the good stuff is anybody who knows me knows I love water. Those people who have been helping me with planning VBS are discovering it more and more. And by the time the next month is over, they're going to think that Pastor John is insane with how he likes water. Is this guy 5? They may ask. But one of my favorite things to do on vacation, a place that I actually relax. Anybody ever hang out in one of those? I love the lazy river. Anybody else love hanging out in the lazy river? All right. So do you guys you get on a tube and you kind of float around and everything? And you know those irritating people who use the lazy river to go really fast? That'd be me. Because that's what I do in the lazy river about 80% of the time. Except for the only thing more fun than making it go really, really fast is sometimes I like to turn around and go backwards and fight the current. Anybody ever? You turn around, you go backwards, you're fighting the current. And my favorite lazy river that I've been in so far is in Frankenmuth at Zender's. And it's a fast lazy river. They have 2 of them. One's a slow lazy river and one is a fast lazy river. But you get in that fast lazy river and the current is traveling really fast and you turn around to go the opposite way. After about 5 minutes of that, you need a tube to sit on and relax. And then people aren't so angry with you for being the one going fast around the lazy river. Except that's how we do it when we're 5. Right? Or when you never grew up. But I thought about this whole lazy river concept and how that applies to life, because I think that we kind of like our life to be like that lazy river, don't we? I like my life to be like that lazy river where I can just relax and everything kind of goes with the flow. Everybody like that? So for those 2 or 3 days in the last decade that's been like that, you've loved them, right? Because it seems like the rest of the time, seems like it's a fight, it's a struggle. Oftentimes it even seems like you're going backwards in the lazy river with the day's life. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only one who, I don't think so. think all of us, as a matter of fact, in the culture that we live in, I think there's this lazy river that encourages us to just sit back and enjoy life. Just take it one day at a time, one moment at a time. Take it easy, and it makes it really, really tough to fight. As a matter of fact, I wrote down this line: to live for God in a compromised culture, we have to learn to live tough as nails. Because in that lazy river, it's easy to turn around for 5 minutes and go counter to culture. But in life, when we're living counterculture, when we're living for God in a world that's going away from Him, sometimes we get tired too. Sometimes it's easy to I'm just not going to say anything. I'm just going to make it through the day the best that I can. And Daniel and his friends, we've learned about his friends that the Babylonians called them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we learned in the first week of this series that that's not really their names. The names that their parents gave them and the names that God gave them is Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. And Daniel, although we call it the book of Daniel, they gave him a different name too, Belteshazzar. But what we learned is that the world tries to put these labels on us and tries to make us think that we're less than what God has called us to be. And what we learned was that if you forget what God says about you, you will miss the life God has for you. So when God's looking at you, He's saying that you're my beloved. He's saying you are the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. He's saying you are forgiven. He's saying that in Him you are more than a conqueror through Him that loves you, right? He says you're not worthless, you're my child. So if we remember what God says about us, then we won't miss the life God has for us. Because God wants us to walk in His power, and this is what we learned in the second week of the series, is that the secret to the power of God is the presence of God accessed through the pathway of prayer. And last week we went through the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's a very famous story in the Bible. These three guys, they get thrown into a fiery furnace. But they weren't there alone. Because when the king looked in, he said, didn't we throw 3 guys into the furnace? Why do I see 4? And the 4th is like a son of God. And so we learned that when we stand for God, God stands with us. So I don't know what your fiery furnace might look like, and maybe it is just trying to go backwards in a lazy river this week. I hope you do have that opportunity. Or maybe you're going to hang out and you're like, I don't really want to help with VBS, but God, why are you telling me to help with VBS? And so if you want to, there's a sign-up sheet right out here. And if God's pricking your heart, and there's plenty of stuff to do. We need crew leaders. Actually, if you've got time tomorrow, we're going to turn this stage, we're actually going to turn this whole room into an ocean. It's more of an ocean of devotion. But it'll look like an ocean in here, and it'll fit too, because next week we're going to start a new series. Maybe you've heard of a guy named Jonah. And we're going to learn that there's a little bit of Jonah in all of us. But whatever it is that God is calling you to do, the thing is that when you stand for God, God stands with you. Even when you feel alone. Even when it looks on the outside like you lost, He still stands with you. And this week we're going to learn the final truth that we're going to talk about anyway from this book of Daniel. We could actually spend the next year in this book of Daniel if I got into the end time prophecy stuff. There's a whole lot of that in there. And quite frankly, there's probably some people who are smarter than me that you could listen to talk about that. And if God tells me to, I will, but we're not going there next week. But this week we're going to learn, let's read this out loud. Grace plus truth equals grace that is greater than truth. Say it again. Grace plus truth equals grace that is greater than truth. Has a good ring to it, don't it? Don't you wish it were true? Don't you wish maybe that it was actually true, that it was in the Bible, that there is a grace that is greater than truth? Daniel's going to unpack that it's not even only a New Testament thing, that it's even an Old Testament thing, because the entire Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, Genesis, in the beginning, Revelation, amen, every single point in the Bible points to one central figure, and his name is Jesus. His name is Jesus. But when I think about this book of Daniel, what is the most famous story from Daniel? Daniel and everybody knows Daniel and the lion's den. I've been learning this story since maybe the first or second time I went to a VBS when I was a kid, or in kids' church, and we learned all the stories of the little boys, right? We learned David was a little boy and he was throwing a rock at a giant, and Daniel was a little boy in a lion's den and looked kind of like this, right? I love this cartoon because it looks like the little boy, but I love what it says at the bottom. Don't you wish he would? Come on, say their name out loud. 1, 2, no, don't do it. God can shut anyone's mouth. Here's the problem with the book of Daniel, though, is Daniel was taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar in 605 BC. He was probably a young boy at the time, taken from his homeland, put into a culture that was completely against God, was being trained by that culture how to be a more excellent sinner, how to be like them, how to be backstabbing, lying, cheating, the wisdom of the world, they wanted him to learn all the magic and divination and all the witchcraft and things that all the other wise men knew, but Daniel, he had no part of it. He didn't need witchcraft because he had his God and he kept his integrity through the whole thing. But the thing is when we get to the story of Daniel and the lion's den, he's not a little boy anymore. He'd already been serving faithfully under 4 different kings by this point, and it wasn't no longer 605 BC, it was about 537 BC, and the way I do the math, maybe Daniel might have been about Dale's age. 85, 90, maybe 80, depending on when he actually went. He wasn't a little boy in the lion's den. He was an old gentleman. He was a ripe old age. He was at a point when maybe he was ready to meet God. I know some of you are going through it right now, where you have parents that are older, they're ready to meet God. If it happened to be in a lion's den, he wasn't going to compromise. He hadn't compromised in his entire life. But we're going to pick this up in Daniel chapter 6. Let's just read. So what had happened before this? In the chapter before this, there's another really famous, the writings on the wall story. And there was a king named Belshazzar who got taken out. And here Daniel again, he's going to find himself, every time there's a new king, he just goes right to the top. New king comes, king promotes this guy named Daniel. New king comes, he promotes this guy named Daniel. New king, got to frustrate everybody who's looking for a promotion in the kingdom, don't you think? No matter what happens, this guy ends up being the guy in charge. And Darius the Mede, who became the new king, decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces. And he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. And the king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protects the king's interests. So he put Daniel as the leader of the leaders. And Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers because of Daniel's great ability. Because of Daniel's great ability. You see, Daniel had high integrity, and he was doing the right thing when no one was looking. All the time, he had the king's best interest in mind. He wasn't looking to forward his own agenda. He was always up to the right thing. And this gave Daniel, because he was doing what God had called him to do, and he was doing it in a godly way, and he was listening to God, he had this great ability. And the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Wow. So Daniel's about to get a promotion. See, here's the thing though, is we learned in chapter 1 of Daniel that Daniel means God is my judge. Belteshazzar means, lady, protect the king. Now, why in the world would they have done that to Daniel? Why would they have given this ridicule name to Daniel? They didn't even give him the right to stand up as a man, much less as to stand against a den of lions, which we're going to run into later in this chapter. I think one of the reasons is that most likely Daniel was a eunuch. He was taken into captivity as a young boy. And if you know what a eunuch is, they have some body parts that are cut off. That doesn't allow them to mature. That doesn't allow their voices to change. And it's possible that as an 84-year-old man, Daniel still talked like a girl. And the enemy all his life kept trying to remind him, but Daniel kept living like God is my judge. You can say whatever you want to about me. God is my judge. I can't control what's happened to me, but God is my judge. And they kept wanting to call him Belteshazzar, but the name never even stuck. The name never even stuck. His integrity was so far and high above. Even the people in that region of Babylon didn't refer to Daniel in his Babylonian name, but referred to him as Daniel. And it was probably because the kings kept making him the boss of everything, and he probably could have had them executed for calling him out of his name. Probably. If you forget what God says about you, you will miss the life God has for you. And Daniel never ever forgot that. Then the other administrators and the high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. So can you imagine politicians in today's day and age if someone went to look for fault in the way they handle government affairs? How hard would that be? I don't care if you're on the right or the left. I think they're all wrong. They're all wrong in some way, shape, or form. There's always something to dig up on somebody, right? Who do you know in politics that nobody could dig up anything on? Believe me, they will make something up if they can't find it. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. Let's read that last. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Wow. Wouldn't you love that to be what someone would say about you? They're faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. How did Daniel keep his humility even in that? How? He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. I'll tell you, that's definitely not something I would say even about myself. It's something I would strive for. But definitely not something I would say is 100% true 100% of the time. Daniel was very, very righteous man of God. So they concluded our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. Now, I like some of the other translations they'll use. The only way we're going to find fault with Daniel is if we can somehow trick him in the laws of his God. So the administrators and high officers went to the king and said, "Long live King Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors. We are all in agreement." That's what he says. We're all in agreement, every one of us, all the ones in leadership, we're all in agreement. Always be careful when somebody's saying to you that everybody's in agreement and there's somebody who should be in agreement who isn't in the room. Because Daniel wasn't in that room. That the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown in a den of lions. Doesn't even make sense, does it? Doesn't make sense. Except for when you consider that Darius is the new king, and a place where he needs to establish that the only rule that mattered was him. And he has some guys stroking his ego, telling him, basically, you're more powerful than God. They should worship you. And he's idiot enough to think, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so it cannot be changed. An official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. See, there was this rule between the Medes and Persians that the king, anytime he signed a decree, it couldn't be done. It couldn't be undone even by the king himself. Like the king is so powerful, so godlike, that even the king can't change his mind. Well, they had a good purpose for that rule, was so that the king wouldn't make quick, stupid decisions thinking that he could undo them. Quick, stupid decisions like the one he's making right now. Like believing that everybody is in agreement with this and one of his chief officials aren't even in the room, but because they were stroking his ego, making him feel, saying what he wanted to hear. Notice that it's easy to manipulate people when you say what they want to hear. Anybody ever been? Yeah. Sometimes. So King Darius signed the law. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, let's read that yellow part out loud. He went home and knelt down as usual. See, this was his normal pattern. These guys had been watching Daniel. They knew what he did. They knew he prayed every day. They could see inside of his window. Back in those days, they didn't have air conditioners, and it was the middle of the desert, so you could see through the windows, and you could see this guy in there praying. They knew what he was doing. They knew what he was up to. They knew there was no fault in it. They knew he was beyond reproach. He went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. And Daniel is giving us the blueprint of the second point of the series, was the secret to the power of God, is the presence of God access through the pathway of prayer. Daniel is demonstrating us how to make a pathway of prayer. It's not praying only one time. It's not praying only when things are going good or only when things are going bad, but he made a habit of prayer. It was the trail that the trail between his heart and God's heart was well worn. He knew the way and he went there every day. There was a pathway to prayer. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house, and what did they find him do? Oh, this bad thing. He was praying and asking for God's help. May you be found the same way. So they went straight to the king and reminded him about the law. Did you not sign a law for the next 30 days? Any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. Yes, the king replied, that decision stands. It is an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. Then they told the king that man Daniel, you see what they called him? Did they call him Belteshazzar? That man Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. But what they didn't know is, well, maybe they forgot that when we stand for God, He stands with us. And what we're going to discover later on in this chapter is that every weapon fashioned against the servant of the Lord, it's not going to prosper. It has a boomerang effect. That thing that's sent to destroy you actually destroys the one who sent it. May we see it in our day, Lord. I love this part. It says, hearing this, the king was deeply troubled. I think it was about this point that the king realized, oh, when I made that decree, there was one of my governors who wasn't in the room. My favorite, Daniel. The most useful of all these servants that we have. The one that I know would never turn his back on me. The one that's been the most faithful and wise and knowledgeable servant that I've had wasn't in the room when I made this. And the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. So he's trying to figure out a way to backpedal, how to undo this. And he spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. In the evening, the men went together to the king and said, Your Majesty, you know that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed. So at last the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. And the king said to him, May your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you. So Daniel has been so faithful. This king is having Daniel thrown into the lion's den and literally praying for Daniel. At the same time, Daniel had been such a witness that even his enemy, or the person throwing him in the lion's den, is on his side. And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seals of his nobles so that no one could rescue Daniel. Can you imagine it? You're in a cave full of hungry lions, and they roll the stone completely pitch black. So dark. And you can hear them breathing. There's no sound except for the sound of the lions. You ever been in a really quiet place and you can hear a pin drop? Imagine the sound of the lion's claws walking all around you. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. The king's fasting and praying for Daniel. Isn't it amazing? He refused his usual entertainment and couldn't sleep all that night. Very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. I love that. Very early in the morning, he's praying. I think that King Darius was afraid of Daniel's God. And what might happen to him if Daniel's blood was on his hands because of his stupid decision. So he hurries to the lion's den, and when he got there, he called out in anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully able to rescue you from the lions?" What is the tension in that moment? Was your God who you serve so faithfully able to rescue you from the den of lions? And Daniel, he's, "Sure enough, King, God can shut anyone's mouth. You better shut up now because the king's coming for you, because my God's going to come for you. He was able to shut these mouths, now you're going to be punished." Is that how Daniel answered? Daniel got all tough now because God was there with him in the lion's den. The angel shut the lion's mouth. Now Darius is going to have to pay. Remember what we're learning this week is about grace and truth, right? So the first thing Daniel says to the king, he doesn't hit him with the truth. He hits him with grace. Long live the king! First thing he hits him with is grace. And the next thing he hits him with is truth. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me. For I have been found innocent in his sight. That is the truth. And I have not wronged you, your majesty, even though you threw me in a lion's den. You see, grace and truth is a grace that is greater than truth. Even though Daniel was being punished as a wrongdoer, he had done nothing wrong. But he teaches us something here. And this is how I wrote it down. Truth is best served sandwiched with grace. Truth is best served sandwiched with grace. We can speak the truth. Actually, the Bible uses this term in the New Testament. It says, speak the truth in love. But this grace sandwich, it means that I'm going to let you know that God loves you, and God is forgiving, and God will forgive anything, and God even loves you no matter what you did. But the truth is, we have to follow what He said. Because He loves you. And He'll forgive you. And you follow Him. The Apostle Paul said, we love Him because He first loved us. Truth is best served sandwiched with grace. Here's where I get that from, and this is John chapter 1, verses 14 and verse 16 we'll read next. But it says, "And the Word, Christ, became flesh, human incarnate, and tabernacled, fixed His tent of flesh, lived a while among us. And we actually saw His glory, His honor, His majesty, such glory as an only begotten Son receives from His Father." I want us to read just these yellow ones out loud. Full of grace and full of truth. Full of grace and full of truth. And most people will say you've got to balance these things, grace and truth. But Jesus didn't come actually to balance grace and truth. He came with a full measure of both. A full measure of grace and a full measure of truth. And if you give anything less than a full measure of either, you're giving less than Christ in you. your hope of glory. Full measure of both. Grace and truth. For out of His fullness, abundance, we have all received, all had a share, and we were all supplied with, let's read that out loud, grace on grace. It's kind of like a sandwich. You got some grace up here, some grace down here, and the truth goes in the middle. And you can't forget any part of it. If we want to move anybody toward God, if we want to move our own lives toward God, if we want to take a step in any organization, in your church, in your work, wherever you're at, it's going to be the sandwich. Truth, grace on grace. Speak the truth in love. Truth is best served sandwiched with grace. I'm going to leave you with that. There's a couple more verses. Gets kind of brutal. I'll go there really quick. The king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den, and not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. When you stand for God, He stands with you. Then the king gave orders. This is where I said it got brutal, right? Okay. Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. He had them thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and their children, and the lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the den. Then King Darius sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Let's read this out loud. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. For He is the living God, and He will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and His rule will never end. I'm just close this in prayer from there. Heavenly Father, we come before You in the name of Jesus. We pray that in our nation that Your name would be regarded as holy. We pray that these words would be spoken in every city. That You are the God who saves. That You are the God who rescues. God, I pray for every single person here who's fighting battles. We all are. That You would show us the pathway of grace and truth. To be able to speak life into a world that's going away from You, Lord, but to be able to speak it in a way that's truth sandwiched with grace on grace. Grace on grace on grace on grace. That You forgive, that You make whole, that You reconcile, that You deliver, that You strengthen us to be able to overcome the hardest thing that we ever face. Grace on grace. That You love us even though we're sinners. But You love us too much to leave us in that pit. And You're offering the hand of rescue, the offering of repentance to each and every one of us, Lord. And I pray with repentful hearts, God, that we would return to You, that we may be full of grace and truth. In Your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.